All right. Good evening, everybody. We are live for the second episode of Anxiety in Athletes. This subject is a very, very good subject. We have three great guests with all varying different experiences, but two former student athletes, and I'm really excited to have all three of them here to answer any of your questions. As always, drop them in the comment box. Let's make sure we're keeping this conversation going even past this episode. So, without further ado, this is Katie O'Dunn. Katie graduated from Candler School of Theology at Emory with her Master of Divinity and Certificate of Religion and Health in May 2015. She has spent the last 5 years serving as the Academy Chaplain and the Pauline and R.L. Brand Chair of Religious Studies at Woodward Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. There, she seeks to inspire students of various faiths to develop a sense of empathy through respectful dialogue by teaching religious literacy. Katie hopes to develop programs to encourage a deeper understanding of mental illness with diverse religious communities. But on top of that, Katie also ran at Elon. So Katie's going to tell us a lot about that and her journey as a student athlete. And then we also have Callie Warner. Callie was an athlete at Rice University. She's a current clinician at McLean OCD Institute in Houston, and she's also obtaining her PhD at Baylor University. Her research focuses on competitive athletes with debilitating anxiety that negatively impacts their performance. Callie's struggle with OCD began at the young age of 4, and she did not receive appropriate treatment until she was competing as a Division I athlete at Rice University. While at Rice, Callie won 9 conference championships and was named an honorable mention All-American in the 10K race. Callie was able to reignite the love for her sport after receiving appropriate evidence-based care. Callie hopes to help others with mental illness know that they are not alone and that appropriate treatment is available to reobtain the joy that mental illness takes away. She recently qualified and competed in the U.S. Olympic Trials Marathon in 2020 and continues to pursue her passion for running while advocating for those struggling with mental illness through her research, therapy, and her own personal testimony. Really, really excited to have Callie on as well. 2 great athletes, but even better people joining us. And then our third amazing guest is Dr. Evelyn Stewart. Dr. Evelyn Stewart is a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist and a clinical and neuroscience researcher. She's a professor of psychiatry in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia and is founding director of the BC Children's Hospital Provincial OCD Clinic and Research Program in Vancouver, Canada. She has authored over 100 original papers, reviews, and chapters on family, clinical, and treatment aspects of OCD throughout the lifespan. As always, we want to just remind right now that this live stream is intended to serve as educational content, and it is for the viewers, and this is we want to make this a safe space, but it's not intended to replace therapy. So for treatment-related questions, let's be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. With all that being said, I'm really, really, really excited to have all three of you with me tonight. Let's kind of get this conversation going, and let's hi Ethan, hi Mike, hi Val. Thanks for joining us. Katie, why don't you start with you and kind of tell us a little bit about your journey with OCD and kind of your athletic career and how OCD kind of impacted your athletic career.
Yeah. So OCD for me has been a part of my life for such a long time. I know I got to, for anyone who was a part of the Faith Conference on Friday, I got to share a little bit about that and how it's been a part of my journey through religious leadership as well. But it's been, unfortunately, a big part of my athletic career. I've navigated OCD since I was about 8 when I had particular worries that my parents would always try to alleviate as a kid that got bigger and bigger and bigger as I got older. And by the time I got into collegiate athletics, things were pretty challenging for me, but I was really, really good at kind of covering things up. I was a Division I runner at Elon in cross country and track, and that was kind of my whole life at that point. I was using that as an outlet to navigate some of what I was experiencing with OCD. And yet the OCD was really impacting my performance, not necessarily in a direct way, but because of all of the things that I was doing outside of practice. So I would go home at night and spend 10 hours checking, at that point, oven, stove, lock, everything's going to burn down, need to pray, need to do it again. Wasn't sleeping, but was also at that point dealing with a fair amount of moral scrupulosity and was going through a lot of different aspects of, I'm a horrible person. What if I did something wrong? What if my team hates me? What if my coach hates me? And had a kind of tough coaching situation as well that we might get into that really emphasized some of that for me, where I was consistently feeling like I was a horrible person that didn't deserve anything, and that really my only worth was tied to my athletic performance, which was being hurt by the fact that I wasn't sleeping and I was compulsing all the time. Eventually, a lot of stuff shifted into harm-related things for me, which continued to impact athletic performance even after college. When I got into triathlon, got into Ironman, unfortunately, there was a lot that I just wasn't enjoying because I would spend 7 or 8 hours out on a bike and I would be ruminating the entire time to try to figure out, did I do something horrible and forget about it? Am I worth it to be out here? Does it even matter if I'm out here? And I would be just going through every single thing in my head, not even present with the training that I was doing. So we'll get into, I know, a lot of these aspects today, but for me, I realized that the big piece, we always hear that, you know, the misconception that OCD helps athletics. It does not. It has not for me. It has completely hindered in many ways my athletic career. But athletics, and for me now, ultra marathon has become a really big motivator for navigating OCD so that I can be present in those things that I love so much and actually enjoy the things that OCD took away from me for so long.
That's phenomenal. And you recently completed your first, I don't want to get the number wrong. What was it?
It was my first 50K trail race.
50K trail race. I don't think I ever ran that cumulative amount in my life. So, and I'm a strength and conditioning coach, but it was a big day. And I think, you know, there's some stuff I'll talk about with OCD too, but it was coming off of kind of a tough OCD period for me as well more recently. And it ended up being a crazy race. This was 3-4 weeks ago. It poured down rain the entire time, and it was in the mountains, and it was like streams of water and mud coming down. And yeah, I see Ethan commenting. Yeah, I was about to mention Ethan. Ethan did wait for 50,000 miles and saw her crush it. So
he was
I think he just wants the acknowledgement of being the best boyfriend. So that's awesome.
So yeah, but we'll get into that. But OCD stuff, I think for me, tackling that on a tough day is kind of the same way that we can tackle OCD in all of these different ways. And it was totally worth it to push through some of the physical and the mental to do the things that I enjoy.
For sure. And I think, you know, one thing that you mentioned towards the end of that kind of emphasis on what we're trying to emphasize here is that OCD doesn't help our careers or even in athletics, right? People usually think, oh, a lot of people have OCD, are perfectionists. That's just going to help them. But really, it's taking away from our recovery. It's taking away from our mental recovery. And so these things, these extra reps, there's a way of getting extra work in without having OCD. And those two things need to be separate. And OCD is never going to actually help us. Dr. Stewart, I'd like to hear your background a little bit and kind of your message for how OCD kind of impacts athletes.
Sure. So I'm a psychiatrist, and I work with kids and families, teens, and adults. And really, when I started paying more attention to this issue of how negative OCD is for athletics was in working with a lot of youth, teens, and so forth, where very often they'd be these excellent athletes, but actually OCD had taken that away from them. So for example, there might be maybe they'd be an amazing soccer player, but then due to contamination fears or some superstitious things, they'd actually wouldn't be able to touch the ball at certain points on the field. So that is not beneficial. And it really kind of hit me over time that this, we know OCD gets in the way of life, at work, at school, and the families at home, but it seemed to have a particular way of kind of getting in there in sports and athletes and tricking people into thinking that somehow their OCD is protecting them. There was this excellent football player who was graduating from high school a few years ago in a program we were running. And actually, OCD ended up taking away his ability to play football at all. But ironically, the obsession was that he wouldn't be good enough at football. So he was doing all these rituals and would be stuck in the car and going back and forth and couldn't make it to football practice. But the obsession is that he'd be bad at football. Right. So again,
right. So what he's doing is trying to he's worried he's going to be bad, but he's actually, by doing all these rituals, he's actually taking away the time to get better at the sport.
Exactly. So this is where OCD can turn things upside down. And really, that's kind of when we decided to see if we could do a little bit of a study to looking at athletes at the University of Tulsa. And a number of them had mental health screens, and I was talking to the psychologist who's there and saying, I bet you anything OCD is going to pop up. And she's like, yeah, you do OCD research. You think OCD is everywhere. And sure enough, that was the one area where it was much higher rates than expected in their athletes. And then we did a follow-up the next year and looking at the performance of athletes. So again, connected to this thing. So we told people the finding, and a lot of people thought, oh yeah, that's of course, because people with OCD are really hard workers and they're perfectionists. So of course it helps them be amazing athletes. But actually, when we did the follow-up the next year, those athletes who had OCD, reported having OCD, were less likely to be, I'm not going to remember the term, all American, all state. I'm Canadian. I can't remember the terminology, but they were significantly less likely to be
have that recognition and have that success.
Yeah.
The bottom line is they weren't going to have that success because of right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me, there's a really good preacher that lives here in Texas, and he wrote the book Breaking Free from OCD, and it's really not research. It doesn't really talk much about treatment, but it talks about his personal story, and he helped me a lot in my journey of recognizing what was going on, and actually told me that it was OCD, which led me to therapy. But he shares, he actually, I think, got second in the Boston Marathon when he was he's a phenomenal distance runner, but not really a big runner now. This was many, many years ago now, but he struggled with very significant scrupulosity, and he was such a good runner, but he would have these intrusive thoughts about, what if I pray to the devil and the devil helps me win the race? And so he, at this huge race, backed off because he didn't want to win because the devil let him win. And now, I mean, he's in such a great place, but it's just such a good indicator of what OCD does.
I remember as an athlete myself, I actually similarly, I always felt that if I did well in something, not even in athletics, if I did well on a test or if I did well in something, then something bad was going to happen in return because it had to even things out and had to equal each other out. So I could never celebrate success because I thought there was something else looming that was coming. And so it's funny that, these athletes are having those kind of intrusive thoughts that at the time I'm like, this is ridiculous, but I feel so real. Nobody else has this thought, but here we are talking about someone else that has something very similar. So Callie, just tell us a little bit about your background now that you started talking. I caught you on the spot now, so you have to finish.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm not very good at keeping my mouth shut. So as I was mentioned earlier, I started struggling with OCD at the age of 4, and I really don't remember it at this time. So this comes from stories that my parents would tell, and I would go around the house bumping my nose and saying, sorry, God, sorry, God, sorry, God, because I worried that if I had told a lie at some point in the day, God would let my nose grow like Pinocchio. And so that's kind of the first symptom that I heard of, but I struggled with a few different subtypes for a while, on and off through grade school, middle school, contamination, a lot of, and to this day, I still struggle with fear that I could have offended somebody and over apologizing. But then sexual intrusive thoughts were pretty prominent, and harm intrusive thoughts. And it would go on and off, and I was just known for being quirky. Did a pretty good job of just keeping it to my parents and not really telling others, except for they noticed, of course, if I would over apologize or things like that. But in high school, I started to get a lot more success in running. And with big races, I would put this extra stress on myself. And so, of course, OCD symptoms would really pick up. And I would do a lot of things, like my high school coach actually had to tie my shoes for me to get to big race starting lines because I couldn't get it right. And I would be late to the start and I had never missed the race because he was so on it with getting me to the starting line. But doing things like putting my number on so that it would face God, the last bobby safety pin would face God, or there were also a lot of magical thinking type things I would do. Like if I put too many bobby pins in my hair, one would weigh me down and then I wouldn't win the race when, bobby pins weigh nothing. And then I got to college and these things were, I wouldn't even say manageable. Somehow I functioned. I mean, I would cry my eyes out the night before race because I knew all the things I would have to do to get to the starting line, but I managed. And then my freshman year of college, I guarantee that the onset or the manageability calmed down because I was injured my whole freshman year. And so symptoms decreased and I was able to make it through. But then my sophomore year, I started to get that success. And in junior year, I was qualifying for nationals, trying to, get to as many races as I could. And the symptoms just went out the door with the harm and sexual intrusive thoughts to where I was afraid to be alone. I remember I had this one class where I would go up a spiral staircase and I would have an intrusive thought that I could jump off. So I would smack myself to the wall and just try to go up the stairs very slowly. And I was so afraid to tell people about these thoughts because I didn't want to get kicked out of Rice or of course they wouldn't kick me out of Rice, but lose my scholarship because some of the thoughts were harm to others, thoughts to others, and I didn't really know what was going on until, as I mentioned earlier, I spoke to Pastor Jeff Wells and he goes, this sounds like OCD, and I actually went to see a counselor that I had found, and they ended up sending me to a hypnotherapist. So this journey was a lot longer than it needed to be. And symptoms exacerbated even more. And I was debilitated to a point where I was on campus at Rice and I was afraid to go into a bathroom by myself because I thought I could hurt someone, or so I would wait all day long, which wasn't physically healthy either, which is all the more reasons why this is not good for athletics. But I would make it and I knew I just needed to make it a few more weeks. So somehow I made it through the national race, and then I would go home for Christmas break. So during that Christmas break is when I actually got sent to the right person, connected with the right psychiatrist, and little by little started getting my life back. And of course, just like anyone else's OCD journey, there have been bumps along the way, but part of the whole testimony for sure. For sure. And, that's one thing that we're going to talk about is that, there's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be, and not every day is going to be perfect. Even after you go through intense treatment, keeping that maintenance, I think, especially as an athlete, is very important. That daily upkeep, even if it's not OCD, of your mental health is really vitally important, especially with the highs and lows of a athletic season or competition. There's a lot of times throughout a season, 3 weeks will be really bad. And everything feels like it's going wrong. And then suddenly a switch flips and everything's going right. And then everything's going wrong again. And so how do we deal with those highs and lows of athletic competition while also dealing with OCD or other mental health disorders? I would love to hear kind of what your thoughts are on how the culture of athletics in general, how that kind of plays into a factor of not seeking help. Because I feel that, so many athletes actually are dealing with this issue, but what we've created, maybe subconsciously, for the most part, hopefully, I would hope it's subconscious, but
that we created this culture and this stigma that mental health is not important or is discouraged to talk about. And there's this stigma that is, in other areas besides athletics too, but it's very, very vital in athletics to understand how much that stigma comes into play. And I think so many athletes don't reach out for that help or don't seek that help because they're afraid of their coach, like Kelly was saying, like Katie was saying, losing their scholarship, losing their spot on the team. Obviously, with races, it's a little different. But if you're in a team sport, decreasing playing time, getting benched, they're worried about that stuff because this coach controls their destiny, right? Their fate is kind of in this coach's hands, whether they're going to play or not. So they're trying to do everything they can to be in this coach's good graces. So as coaches, as sport coaches, how do we get the coaches to kind of cultivate that culture of, okay, your personal issues aren't going to affect who I put on the field or on the court or whatever?
Yeah,
this is a free-flowing conversation. You guys can, whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting hearing this because, again, it's so similar for anyone who's on here who went to the faith conference on Friday. It's so interesting, so similar in the two communities, that in the faith community, there's this notion of, oh, you can just pray to God and you can get rid of this thing that you're going through and you're fine. And I think in athletics, it's very, very similar. It's like, if you are a strong athlete, if you're a strong person, you should be able to navigate whatever it is that's going on in your head. And I think that's often how coaches approach that. I think I had that experience with some of my coaches in my history. And I think that as athletes, even athletes without OCD, we want so badly to perform at a high level. We want to put everything we can into that physical piece. So I think it gets really frustrating when it's like, well, I'm doing this thing physically. Why can't I just fix it myself mentally? So I think it's really important for coaches, one, to understand these issues, to understand anxiety, to understand OCD, to understand other mental health conditions, but also to affirm athletes. And as Tom said, let them know that their playing time, that the way that they're viewed isn't going to be impacted by them needing some aspect of help. I am a school chaplain. I also coach middle school cross country and track. And even at that early of an age, I have a couple kids that are really, really, really struggling with some level of anxiety, potentially OCD, not sure. But I think for me, it becomes really important to let them know that has nothing to do with how I see them in the sport, that they are awesome and that they are amazing and that we're going to take care of those other things and that that's okay so that they can be the best athletes that they can possibly be. And I think affirming them in that area is so incredibly important to know that you can still be strong and get treatment. And actually, it is strong to get treatment.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
I want to kind of add to that too from two different points. One thing that I think of a lot lately is a lot of athletes are told, well, you have to have some anxiety to perform. And so I think they're just normalizing as much as they can the anxiety that they're struggling with. Even as an athlete, racing in middle school, high school, I was told, well, if you're not anxious, you're not doing something right because you have to be anxious before your race. And to an extent, maybe this is correct. Like in order for an adrenaline rush to kick in, you want to have a little bit of anxiety, but I think that I took that as, oh, this is how it's supposed to be, especially if you're with OCD and the rigid way of thinking that can come into play at times. And so again, that's just like another component that makes it really difficult to speak out. And so the anxiety shouldn't be a certain way, and like educating the coaches on that too. Fortunately, I had two coaches that were very supportive in high school and college, but I know not everyone does. And I think everyone on their journey with OCD at some point as an athlete has heard this is helping your performance, which is so heartbreaking. But like, I guess it does make it more real or more scary for them to be able to reach out because they say, well, if I get treatment, will I still be good at this sport? And, it's all comes down to this need to educate. That's not
for sure. I mean, so in performance, I mean, look at me. Wow. Finally putting this master's degree to good use here. we have eustress, which is spelled EUSTRESS, and that's the good stress, like that adrenaline rush that you're talking about. That comes from eustress. But then we have distress, which is that anxiety that actually prohibits us from actually doing what we need to do to perform. And so I think they kind of get me that, oh, anxiety is good. You know, if you don't have anxiety, you don't care enough. Whereas, okay, maybe you have some pregame jitters because you're excited to play, but it really shouldn't be more than that, right? It shouldn't be more than, you know, it shouldn't be, if I lose this game, I'm gonna, you know, my family's gonna die in a car crash. You know what I mean? So like, there's varying levels, and I think that we get caught up in kind of thinking that, oh, all stress is good related to sport because that means they care enough. And when in reality, stress has no difference in whether you care or not. Stress is caused by, you know, something more than that. And I think one thing I'm hearing is that we really need to, as coaches, emphasize the fact that this extra work isn't what's getting you to, this extra work from your OCD or anxiety isn't what's getting you to the next level. Putting in extra work in the appropriate time and the appropriate place, that's what might get you to that next level. But also keeping in mind sleep, recovery, nutrition, you know, all those factors, that performance triad, like that, those are things like that we kind of forget about because we see that, you know, the media always blasts the that person getting up extra shots after the lost game, or the person putting in that extra work after a heartbreaking loss. And then we see that, oh, he's putting in that work, like that means that if we do that, we're gonna be the best we can be. But who knows what that athlete's struggling with, right? Like, who knows if that athlete is actually doing that because he's afraid of an obsession that he's having, you know? So there's a line where that athletics really crosses so much. And it's something that obviously we're here talking about because we want to change that line of what's healthy, extra work, and what's overboard, what's overkill, and what's actually going to be detrimental to us. And I think when it gets to that, when it starts playing into the anxiety and becomes a compulsion, it's detrimental. There's no compulsion that's going to help us actually get better in our athletic career. And that's what we really want to emphasize here today. So Dr. Stewart, just, you know, what are your experiences working with athletes, hearing from them kind of their fear of coaches or of seeking help? Have you worked with anybody that was kind of pushing back help?
So I've worked with a lot. I've tended to work more with younger kids and teens, less so kind of college level. But yeah, certainly.
Well, I think this is good though, because it starts at that young age, honestly.
Exactly. Yeah. And certainly I've heard a lot of parents worrying about this. Should they tell the coach? Should they not? If they tell the coach, is the kid going to get kicked off the team, or maybe not be played as much, or maybe there'll be some stigma? So I've certainly heard that discussed an awful lot. And I think a sad thing that I've seen a lot is some great potential athletes or great athletes where OCD has taken away their potential athletic career, where basically it's gone from being a joyful thing to play that sport and to be excelling and great, and this has been a positive part of their life, to where OCD gets involved and turns it into a distressing thing. And actually in response to that, I always find it very sad when you've had a kid or a youth and they really loved a sport or engaging in this, and it was such a positive part of their life, where OCD turns it around and maybe they just leave it altogether and don't engage in any sports. So I think where I've been involved more is meeting a lot of kids and families where that child or youth had a very promising career, and it was something they enjoyed. And it was sort of a gift that they had, where basically OCD kind of shuts that down.
Yeah, I get that question a lot too from parents of young athletes the question, like, should I just remove them from the sport altogether? Should I just take them out? And it's so important to educate them on. But if you remove them from that, it's just going to be the next thing. And it's also just, mind blowing. But also we realize we need to educate them because they just don't have any clue on like what's going on or the cycle, and how can they if this is the first time that they're experiencing it for their child. But we did that a lot
because OCD never gets enough. It'll take a piece and it'll take away the hockey or whatever, and then it'll take the next piece and the next piece, and it's less about the parent needing to protect the child from OCD and more about sort of practicing and realizing there is a way to push back.
Right.
And there is a way you can tolerate stress. And of course, if you're someone who's vulnerable to OCD or anxiety, there may be during more, trickier times, it may flare a bit, but that doesn't mean you can't do the sport. And it definitely doesn't mean that the answer is to yank the kid out of the sport or to say, it's too much and I'm going to end up doing OCD stuff, so forget it altogether.
Right.
Avoidance is the enemy, right? It's about kind of trying to.
That's almost avoidance. Yeah. Avoidance in itself is another compulsion.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Avoidance in itself is another compulsion that I know personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know personally, I was dealing with a lot of avoidance too, not even just in athletics, but in social situations. In high school, I didn't want to go out because I knew that was going to put me in a place where my OCD was going to be triggered. And so I think what you're saying is really important, that we shouldn't just remove the athlete or the youth athlete, especially because burnout is so real, with or without anxiety and OCD. I feel like that's just another hot topic in athletics, especially starting at the youth levels. And we talked about it last episode with John Buck and in what he sees with parents and how they kind of push. And you can tell it's not benefiting the youth athlete at all. But as a strength coach, I like to say, like, play as many sports as you want when you're young, because like when we kind of zone in on one when at such a young age, that's all you're doing all the time. You start putting so much pressure on it. Then by the time you're in 10th grade, you just get really burnt out.
Yeah. And that's like, to feed on that. That's what I think you were talking about, Tom, but the biggest emphasis is be preventative. Like when you see symptoms start, because I think you mentioned something about how you would have good success. Are you guys hearing it?
It's a bit glitchy.
A little choppy.
Yeah. Like you would mention having, is that better?
Yes.
A bit of success in your sport, and then OCD would swoop in and take that success away. And so I just remember the progression of my symptoms getting worse and worse, when it would just start with a simple double checking a plug at the house before I would leave for a race. And then it ended up being, I would do well in a race, but then convince myself immediately after I crossed that finish line that I had cut a corner somewhere that someone didn't see. And so it just went from taking a little bit more to a little bit more to a little bit more to just being no fun at all. And so if you can be preventative, you can get that before it gets to that point.
And if I could jump into that, just another piece. So basically you want to be preventative for sure. But if a parent's kind of sitting here and saying, oh, my child's OCD is too bad when they play whatever this game is, and it's hard for them, so they don't enjoy it, so they shouldn't play it. But this is not the case. So pushing back against the OCD to get back what you had is key. And there's going to be distress. That is,
right.
It's going to be whatever you do in life, even outside of sports. There's going to be things that are just, upsetting or distressing or stressful. But I think it's such a big key to learn that you can actually get through it. So for a parent who's saying, oh, my child, it's not joyful for them anymore because OCD makes it too hard. The answer isn't that you cut out that stuff in their life. The answer is help and support and practice and maybe some ERPs and kind of getting through it. But knowing that it's not going to go from being distressing to, just gone away.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great point. And when we're thinking about ERP, when we're thinking about ACT, it's all about our values. And I think, flipping it around, the reason that athletics for so many of us becomes so challenging in the realm of OCD is because OCD does link to the things that are important to us.
Right,
and the best way to combat that is to continue to live into our values as we're exposing ourselves to the things that we're afraid of. So I think the best thing to do is to continue to dive into those sports and continue to dive into the things that are important to us while using the appropriate tools. I recently, there's a new blog on the awesome new OCD and athletes page that I wrote about kind of my Ironman journey. And I raced 7 halves and 3 fulls. And I don't remember really anything outside of the obsession that I had in each of those races. I can look at the time of year that was. I can remember what I was obsessing about in the water, on the bike, who I thought I might have said something bad to, who I thought I had hurt and forgotten about. I mean, whatever it was that I was going through on that particular day. And it just made it an absolute nightmare for those races. And at the same point, through my recovery, through my treatment, I continued to race. And I'm so glad I did, because I think it would be even more tragic for me to give up those things that I care so deeply about. And I'm at a point now where I'm probably enjoying them more than I have in a decade or maybe more. And if I would have given that up, I think I would have gotten sicker. And also I wouldn't have these amazing things that are a part of my values.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine obsessing all underwater, let alone I obsess, just existing and then being underwater. That's a different animal, Katie. That's impressive. That's a testament of how good of an athlete you are. I don't know. Yeah. I'd love to hear more, Katie, about, you mentioned earlier, a coaching situation that was tough on you. If you don't mind going into detail with that, because I think, one of the things that where we kind of are at the bottom still with that is education for coaches, especially sport coaches, of seeing symptoms and creating a culture of it's okay to not be okay, and that athletes are human beings first. When they recruit, the problem with sports is that there's so much at stake and people's jobs are on the line, and I get that, but at the end of the day, as a sport coach, you're recruiting human beings first. And I think that gets really lost. Whereas as a strength coach, I get these human beings, these athletes, for 45 minutes to an hour, 3-4 times a week. And then I don't see them the rest of the time. So I get to see them at their most, at their times where they're most themselves and able to kind of feel a little bit more free because their sport coach who decides their playing time isn't watching. So I get to build those relationships with them, which is why I love my job so much, is that, we don't have to, they know we're not dictating their fate on the field or on the court or on the ice. It's more about, I'm just here to help you get better as an athlete and help you through your journey. And that's, helping them kind of fall in love with that process is what I love to do. But I think what the sport coaches end up doing is putting so much emphasis on what's expected of them, and then they feel like they can't meet that expectation, and they start to spiral. And that culture of that macho man, like, you can't talk about mental health. I'd like to hear about how it kind of played out for you, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting for me because my OCD was really starting to spike in college. When I got really, really sick, it was actually after college. But part of the reason I think that was because of some of the experiences I had in collegiate athletics. And I've had some really great coaches. I've also had some really tough coaches, and I had an experience in college with a coach that, along with some of my teammates, it was a really tough 4 years. And for me, I was injured my first year. I had back-to-back stress fractures, similar, Callie, I related to being injured my freshman year. And I was really of no value to this particular coach at that point. Have some pretty horrific stories of getting left places on crutches and all kinds of stuff. And by sophomore year, when I started to be able to compete again, I wanted so badly to bring value to the team. Outside of that, I was struggling with at the time checking. I was struggling with harm. I was struggling with all sorts of different things, but I was also kind of getting bullied by my coach, which a lot of the other athletes were navigating as well. And I got to be so afraid, on top of my OCD, of not being liked, of being a horrible person. I used to get on the floor of my coach's office. She would text me and say, "Hey, can you come to see me?" And I'd get on the floor of her office and I would go to the bathroom and I would cry before even getting there because I was so terrified of what it was that she was going to say. I remember getting shaken after a race and thrown up against a fence. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So lots of things. And for me, navigating that while navigating OCD, it was like affirming for me that I wasn't good enough. It was affirming for me that there was something wrong with me. And even the signs that roommates started to see that there were some things going on, like it's a very long story, but I was compulsively eating artificial sweetener packets, there's a very long story associated with why I got into doing that. But they told my coach, and she came and she threatened me, and she said that if I didn't stop immediately, that they were going to put me in a psychiatric hospital and they would take away my scholarship. And there was a lot of, I need to get it together or I can't race for this person. And I'm not a good person. I'm not good enough. I got to be the captain. I haven't talked about this probably in 10 years, but I got to be the captain my senior year. And I felt like I was protecting all of our younger athletes. And that's when I was really starting to get sick, but had to push all of that down because I didn't want them to be hurt the same way that I was. And I think that's part of when I got out and got really, really sick from a lot of OCD aspects. It was like I had somebody for 4 years that was affirming all of the things that my OCD was telling me of why I was bad and why I wasn't good enough.
Right. I think that's, I'm sorry you went through that, but I think also what it did was make you become a stronger advocate too, is because, what you touched on at the end is that you didn't want people to suffer like you had. I think that's something that I personally agree with and feel the same is, as advocates, especially in athletics, whoever's listening, anytime we do advocacy work, like the reason we're doing it, and I know it's the case for you three too, is that because we don't want people to suffer like we've seen before and like we felt before. So, kudos to you for not only making it through, but making it through a better person and becoming a captain. That's terrific. So just a reminder, everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We're answering whatever you want. Just going forward, I've worked with a bunch of good sport coaches, and I've worked with some sport coaches that, played up that mental health stigma way too much and added to it and made it a lot worse. Callie, what was your experience with between recruiting and kind of navigating that journey? And then once you got to college and dealing with your coach there.
Yeah. So because I had finished, summer was always an amazing time for me in high school because there was a time where I wasn't competing and we were just doing long runs and there weren't really any workouts. Mm-hmm. And so the recruiting process, I can't remember exactly how the rules worked, but it began while I was in school, started getting calls and then visits to my parents' house. And I knew that I had wanted to stay in Texas. Mainly, I didn't realize this is why at the time, but because I thought with my OCD that I didn't know was OCD, that I couldn't handle much stress. And so I had limited the move. And even my family was like, yeah, you need to be close to home. We don't know why, like, you can't handle these levels of stress and you do these things. And so I think the recruiting process would have been much more overwhelming because as any high school athlete that has had placed in any, done well, like had success, right? The letters just
start flooding in. Yep.
Flood in. And so it was nice to be able to limit it in that way. But I also knew that Rice was close to my home. we might be a little boastful about this, but we say it's the Harvard of the South. So it was kind of a no-brainer, but I had visited UT. The coach there was incredible, but intense. And I think, for some people, you need more of an intense coach that's going to be on you because you might not stay on the path. But for me, I was so the opposite end that I would crumble if someone were intense because I would question everything that I already thought I was doing. And so I looked for a coach that was similar to my high school coach that was very supportive and didn't need to double check to make sure I was doing what I was doing because I was going to do it 3 times and more. Right. And so I found a coach like that. And that was another reason why I chose Rice, just because of his patience and kindness that I saw when I went on my visit to Rice with all of the athletes there. And so that I know that's not the case for everyone.
Right.
A lot of people, I think, don't even find that answer while they're in high school, that I need a coach that is going to not push me in this way, because I think every athlete is told, oh, you got to have someone that's hard on you or you're not going to succeed. So I think for me, the journey was kind of a rare one, but like a fortunate one in that sense.
Right. Yeah. I always wondered, what the recruiting process would be like for a student that's dealing with OCD on top of that, and then how their obsessions would kind of play into the recruiting process, because it's a are you wanted game. You know what I mean? Like, do they want me? Do I want them? And, you put your value, so much of your value and your worth into what you do as an athlete. I think that's kind of what you had mentioned earlier. One of you mentioned earlier about identity. And I think that's kind of one of the other things I wanted to kind of touch on here is after you were finished at the college level, obviously you guys are both still competing at some level, but what was that like, for 4 years and even before that, try to get to that level, you're tying your whole life to this sport. And, this is something where I want to be there for my athletes after they graduate, because I want to make sure that they're finding their identity outside of their sport too. Like, they're still human beings and they have so much life ahead of them. And I feel like so many times these athletes, we know the percentages of being a professional athlete. It's not high. I am not a dream killer. I love dreaming big, but it's important to find that identity through college and have that identity outside of your sport, because the ball stops bouncing eventually.
Yeah.
Or the cleats get hung up, whatever it is. And I think I'm interested to hear from you guys and Dr. Stewart, if you've worked with any athletes that have dealt with that, even at the youth level, tying their identity to their sport, kind of what your guys' experience with that is.
So this is my favorite topic of all time, and I will get on my soapbox for just 2 minutes and then I'll let others take it. But there's the Weight of Gold documentary that I think everybody should watch that Michael Phelps released recently, and it's so powerful just to all athletes and mental health as a whole. And it talks a lot about how these Olympic athletes go and compete at this race that they've been working for their whole life, and then afterwards the depression kicks in, and like the number of Olympic athletes that have committed suicide is unheard of. Just there was a big problem with that, and now they've hired mental health committee members, and so it's going to improve hopefully. But I think every athlete experiences that, whether they're transitioning from high school going to college or college going to outside of college. And for me personally, the experience was a little bit different with trying to compete for the Olympic trials in the marathon.
Right.
But I still had a shock to the system, is what I say, because there was this transition period where my OCD was doing better my senior year of college, and I had gotten treatment and started to build momentum. And then there was a break from competing altogether. And then I started training for the Olympic trials. And at the trials just a year ago, my OCD symptoms came back for about a week in full force. And I was a clinician at this time, seeing my own patient caseload. And I was just completely caught off guard. And I tell my patients all the time, that, hey, this is part of the process. You're going to have ups and downs, but I wasn't able to take my own advice. And I just freaked out and thought, what is happening? Do I need to check back into my own more intensive treatment?
Right.
It was short-lived, which is why I have to kind of remind myself, oh yeah, I tell my patients all the time, there's a difference between a lapse and a relapse.
Right.
but it's interesting how anxiety can make you lose insight when you preach all the time the words that you're supposed to. So it was just a really crazy experience and a lot of emotions, but I feel like I've kind of balanced it out now. I still miss some components of athletics, but also, even though my running experience was good at times, there's a lot of bitterness associated with my college experience because of OCD. Even like remembering some of those things, people say, do you miss running as a college athlete? And my answer is no.
Right.
Because of what I had to go through, but I'm trying to kind of create this new mold as a post-collegiate athlete.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think one of the things, that I like that you said is that you're almost moving on in a way that you've been able to continue what you're doing, but not at the magnitude of having the OCD kind of play into it. And I think it's important to never lose your love for the sport, even after you're done competing. It doesn't mean just because your career is over that it's not a part of you anymore. But it's just important to, I think, like you said, with the suicide rates of Olympic athletes, I think you're representing your country,
right?
Your literal country for your sport. I mean, that is like unbelievable in its own right. So imagine the pressure they're feeling, and the fact that we were that late to realize just kind of shows, that we're making progress, but we also have a ways to go with how much we need to kind of make improvements in that department.
Right. These athletes are the best of the best, and they weren't receiving appropriate treatment. So like, imagine what that means for everyone that's not an Olympic athlete.
Right.
I think it's really interesting because I love this topic, and I think it looks a little bit different for me because I tied, at the time I didn't know that I was navigating OCD and all different things, and I tied so much of the anxiety and the stress that I had in college to some level of abuse from the coaching kind of staff. And I had this view that, okay, when I'm done with this, when I make it through my 4 years, I won't be stressed ever again, and I will feel all better and things will be great. So I think for me, I was almost looking forward to, as much as I loved running, being done with my college career and finding a love of running again. And then I got out and I realized, oh wait, this was bad, but there's something else that's going on here too. So, I spent all of grad school and the first couple of years of work, yes, still running, competing at a high level. I was racing ITU triathlon, I was racing Ironman, but it's still, I don't know, I didn't go through this post-college lull, but I was still experiencing the same level of anxiety that I was experiencing with it in college. It had just shifted for me to things like harm. I would go out on a run and I would get back and have a great run and be like, wait, did I accidentally hurt someone out on that run? Did I punch someone and are they lying in the ditch? And did I forget about it? Did I do X, Y, and Z? Because I struggle with a lot of false memory harm kind of stuff. I can even think of one Ironman race shortly after college where I couldn't enjoy the finish because someone was laying down in the finish that had kind of passed out close to the finish. And I finished and had been convinced that I had knocked them out. And I obsessed about it for 2 weeks. I went back and I looked at all the video footage. I didn't want to be a finisher, didn't want to qualify for anything from that, all kinds of stuff.
And you had trained for this for so long, so intensely, for so much time, and thought about this moment, and here you are, you can't enjoy it.
No.
OCD just sucks.
Almost every race for me was like that for so long. But I think the reason I'm saying it went from college to, okay, I'm going to get out of this, it's going to be great, to feeling like a different sort of anxiety after college. And I think for me, eventually getting the right treatment, and that comes back to, so many different things. I'm enjoying the sport for the first time since before college. And I think I never had that sad lull. I just had that continued anxiety. And I'm happy to say that now, thanks to things like ERP and thanks to things like ACT, that it's probably the first time in my life that I'm actually enjoying running. And it's not necessarily because I want to hit a particular time, or I mean, I do want to hit a particular time. I like to be competitive with stuff, so that's kind of a lie.
The competitive side never leaves, of course.
Yeah, no, but it's fun. It's fun for the first time, and I want individuals, whether they're in college or coming out of college, to have that experience to do the things that they love.
Yeah,
and I think one thing as well is that even outside of athletics, you know, for kids or youth or young adults, older adults who've managed to live with OCD and survive and thrive, there is such great resilience and strength there. And then if you've been someone who's dealt with OCD and been an athlete, I think that's something I remind folks of as they're moving on to a new chapter. So maybe they're saying goodbye to some of the athletics or onto a new phase, whatever that is to reflect back on, you know what, you can take a look around you at your peers and what you've gone through, and the resilience you've shown to kind of be here now is phenomenal.
Right.
So
you have that extra piece to draw on as you move forward.
Definitely.
Because there will always be uncertainty in life. OCD thrives on uncertainty. Needing to know 100%, needing to have a sense of control. That will be there. There will be stress and distress, but sort of having that ability to pat yourself on the back and say, yeah, I did it.
Right.
You know,
I think what
OCD is a monkey on my back, but I did it.
Right. I think what you're saying, like you're saying, Dr. Stewart, I think what treatment and fighting that OCD and leading into that uncertainty actually shows you is also beneficial for your competition and in your sport. Like, I don't think, you know, I say this all the time, but what we do in the weight room and what I try to show them is that resiliency and overcoming certain obstacles, because that also translates into other things outside into their sport and in real life after their sport, when they're still facing that uncertainty and those difficult things, because difficulties aren't going to stop. Challenges aren't going to stop after your competition ends, right? It's just that's how life works. Real quick, I just want to kind of have Dr. Stewart explain what ERP is for our friend Grace here, and also I see Michael's comment about not being able to handle stress well. Kind of want to ask you guys, what are some ways to dealing with some forms of stress rather than avoiding the stressful situations? We have like 3 or 4 minutes. I'm leaning on you guys. Give it your best shot.
Okay, I'll do ERP, and maybe you guys could do the stress piece. So
Great.
ERP is a type of cognitive behavior therapy. It stands for exposure and response prevention. So actually what it is the exposure is trying to bring on the OCD, or like bring on the distress, because you don't want to, if you're practicing fighting OCD, you don't want to sit around all day and just wait for it to come along. You're wanting to do it at a certain time. So the exposure is all about like bring it on, trying to trigger that OCD thought or the obsessions, but disconnecting it from the rituals. So doing the exposure, getting the OCD going, and doing the thing that you don't usually do. So not doing the ritual, not doing the avoiding, doing the opposite of what OCD is telling you. And it's really by over time practicing, you sort of disconnect this like obsession from that thing, that whatever it is that the go-to is that makes you feel better, whether it's washing your hands or checking something or saying a prayer or counting to a certain number. So it's making that disconnection over time. So exposure, which triggers the obsession, and then not doing that ritual that you usually do, and you practice it over time. So that's ERP.
And obviously ERP is, there's a lot to say about it, but that is probably the best 1 minute and 30 description I've ever heard. So
okay. It's the gold standard of treatment.
I think it was pretty great. So
it's proven research.
I think that's the main thing to stress too, is that it is proven to be the most effective treatment for OCD. And I know personally, and I'm sure Callie and Katie can also kind of piggyback on this, but I know ERP, the combination of ERP and taking an antidepressant saved my life. I definitely wouldn't be where I am without that treatment. So there's a lot of ERP resources on the IOCDF website. I encourage you guys to definitely go on the IOCDF website and do your research and look at all the amazing resources we have there. Real quick, Katie, Callie, just mention one each. of some ways to kind of handle stress without using the avoidance technique.
I think, just actually going off of what Dr. Stewart just said, I think for me, actually living into ERP in my daily life is kind of what that's all about. It's when a stressful situation comes up, being able to reframe and say, this is a great real life opportunity to do some ERP. And I go through in my head, which sounds really juvenile. I use a lot of acronyms because I work with kids. So for me, I use the 3 M's. And in my head, if something stressful comes up, I say more, maybe, move on. So I literally say, okay, bring it on. And then say, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And then move on with my day. And for me, that's kind of how I move through the stress rather than going around it, is to actually say, let's bring it on harder. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And I'm going to move on with something that's more value driven for me, and trusting that it's probably OCD, regardless of what my brain is saying. And that if I use that strategy, if I live into that ERP in my daily life, that my life will become easier over time, and that I'll be able to continue doing those things that are meaningful.
Awesome. Thank you. Callie, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just speak, since we've covered the ERP part, I'll just speak from a general life stressor point. Sometimes we just have everyday stressors, and for everyone, I think their answer is going to be a little bit different. Like mindfulness or exercise for me is a big way that I can relieve some stress. But I think there's also OCD that I have to be aware of if I'm going to exercise. So I could totally see OCD latching onto that and saying, you can't handle stress anymore, so let's go for a run. So every once in a while, I'll do my own unplanned exposure and I'll say, I'm stressed. Okay, I'm not going to go for a run. Let me just sharpen the edges with some of my own ERP to make sure that doesn't become a compulsion.
Right. Okay, we are pretty much out of time here. Just some announcements. Be sure to check out the Anxiety and Athletes website. We have just made it official and it is live now. There's going to be educational resources coming soon, but we have a blog article from Callie and Katie. We have a bunch of different resources. Really trying to make this a space for people to be able to really actually contribute themselves as well. I want to hear from athletes, coaches, parents, not just us, the advocates that have helped create this website. We want to hear from you guys. So if you are interested, feel free to reach out to the IOCDF. Feel free to reach out to an advocate such as myself, and we will help you get involved. Dr. Stewart just put it, if you want to say I saw that question about the data. If you want to just tell Mateus real quick about some data within the athletic community, you can definitely go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Just from a small study that we did of college athletes, we found rates of OCD, like meeting diagnostic criteria, of 5%. So that's about 5 times what you would expect in the general population, where the general population rates used to be thought it was 1 to 3%, but now it's pretty clear it's 1%. So 5 times that. And if I could throw in one additional thing for anyone attending here, we're doing mental health impacts of COVID survey. And if anyone's willing to do it, takes about 10 minutes and we'll give you 10 Canadian dollars, whatever the equivalent of that is in American dollars, maybe 25 cents or something.
Any compensation is good compensation. I just also want to plug Callie's new children's book. In addition to being a phenomenal athlete and advocate and clinician, she also decided to one-up everybody and write a children's book. Just kidding. It is called Anxious Annie, and it's everywhere pretty much, right? It's on Amazon.
Barnes and Noble, Target. I think it's sold out at Amazon right now. So Barnes and Noble or Target, you can still get it, or Author House is the publishing company that.
I think Katie has her copy. Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
I love it.
So
phenomenal job on that. That is, like we were talking about before, a bucket list item. That's not something you see every day, and that's awesome. I definitely will get my copy. So definitely everybody check that out. Be sure to check out Chris's Corner next week. There should be a Just Ethan episode as well next week. And everybody be well, stay safe, and keep fighting the fight against stigma.
You're resilient.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.